I set out to compare Morriel and Storing's cases against nonviolent civil disobedience and civil disobedience itself. First, I took a look at Storing's article, The Case Against Civil Disobedience, and he found his most striking characteristic of civil disobedience is its irrelevance to the problems of today. He argues that civil disobedience is an attempt to put levels of principle, revolution, and conventional political action all in one thing, but it is unsuccessful. He looks at civil disobedience in the context of civil rights movement and also distinguishes testing of the law and if it's constitutional from civil disobedience. He agreed with Malcolm X in the sense and said that nonviolent resistance is the sword that heals. He was pretty critical of what King was doing. He obviously agreed with what he was doing in the civil disobedience way, but he thought that the nonviolent part of it was not going to get him that far, and that he was just feeding into the hand of the oppressor, basically. And yeah, well, one of his quotes was, "Revolutions overturn systems." In the sense of showing respect to the law by accepting punishment is adhering to the unjust law one is trying to disobey. And then I went on to Morriel, whose article was "The Justifiability of Violent Civil Disobedience." Morriel is not so concerned with the wording of what civil disobedience is or whether nonviolence or violence is a part of it. His biggest concern is to see if political disobedience directed at an unjust law can have violence and be justified. He agrees with Storing in a sense, but he didn't want to look at riots and revolutions because he felt that those narrowed the scope on the objective thought of violence. It made people so against it because usually those were not always justified, each violent action that was occurring. So he talks about the roots of violence and prima facie rights that give us a sense of self-respect to one's being. And he breaks violence down into physical violence or psychological violence, and it's violence if it eliminates or dominates autonomy. And it also includes coercion, which is very important. He finds that it's very hard to separate violence and civil disobedience, and coercion is key in this because it dispels others' claims that civil disobedience is nonviolence. Without coercion, it makes it unclear why there would need to be a law broken in the first place. Coercion and physical violence is sometimes justifiable. While it's physical violence and coercion that violate the prima facie rights, circumstances may change that. He uses an example of a runaway slave, and in this circumstance, the slave master is chasing him and trying to capture him, which is taking away his autonomy and prima facie rights. But an onlooker may tackle the slave master and pin him down or hurt him. So this act of violence it's an act of violence, but at the same time, the unjust or immoral law of slavery kind of overturns the fact that he's breaking his prima facie rights. It makes them a moot point almost that they're both eliminated by this. So it's like a compromise situation. He argues that the breaking of prima facie rights should not be taken lightly, but strictly in principle, followed in a correct manner that includes safeguards and achieves its ends correctly. Violent acts may be justifiable through civil disobedience.